What did you think of the rally that your team had in the fourth quarter, particularly when it comes to Caitlin? I think she made 5 threes in that fourth quarter, more than our first 2 games combined. So just your thoughts on the resilience from her.
I thought our whole group showed resilience, in that rally. We showed the ability to make tough shots. We had some really good time and score execution moments, offensively and defensively, in those moments. We just have to have more of it.
What should have been another routine post-game press conference suddenly exploded into one of the most uncomfortable moments of the WNBA week after Stephanie White looked visibly irritated by nonstop questions about her rotations and coaching decisions. Reporters kept pressing harder, but the more they pushed, the more obvious it became that something behind the scenes was starting to boil over. Fans immediately noticed the tension, and social media wasted no time turning the awkward exchange into a full-blown controversy. Now everyone is asking the same question. Are players quietly losing faith in the system? And did Stephanie White just accidentally expose a much bigger problem hiding inside the locker room?
Now, Caitlin Clark did speak to the media after this, and Stephanie White. We finna listen to Caitlin first. Something just has to be done with this team. To me, the Indiana Fever need to fire Stephanie White before the end of the month. So today's the 15th. If they do not win a home game this next game, we seriously, I know we all make videos saying that she need to be fired, but Christy's size was not this bad. I don't give a damn that they caught back up, that they was behind by 14, 15.
The scary part was not even the loss itself. Indiana has already played too many games this season that slipped away in the final minutes. What made this one feel different was the atmosphere surrounding it. Everything suddenly looked like a franchise slowly falling apart in real time while the people inside the organization kept pretending nothing was wrong. The mistakes were becoming impossible to hide, the frustration was growing louder every night, and the cracks that once looked small were now turning into full-blown problems. At some point, raw talent stops being enough to save a team, and Indiana may have just reached that breaking point.
I wanted to turn the page defensively for that first game of the season. What did you like better about today?
Well, they gave up 78 points. We're going to win a lot of games.
We did. I thought...
What more do you want?
I want more. Coaches always want more. That's the nature of beast. We gave up 11 fast break points. Transition defense, and it's hard. Sometimes turning the ball over or quick shots lead to transition opportunities, but our transition defense has to get better. I think our ball screen defense early wasn't really good. We got better in certain situations, and then we became hackers.
A double overtime loss at home is supposed to be the kind of night that leaves an entire organization searching for answers, especially when your star guard delivers the type of performance that should have carried any team in the league to a win. But instead of accountability, what followed felt strangely defensive, almost like people were trying to escape the real conversation before it even began. That was the moment fans started noticing the energy change. The frustration was no longer just about losing games. It became about how the team was responding to the pressure, and suddenly the problems surrounding Indiana started feeling much bigger than basketball.
Let's get the bad news out of the way. Stephanie White is still your coach. But damn, Caitlin Clark tried her best to single-handedly save Stephanie White's sorry A. I'm just keeping it real. Just go on. Caitlin Clark knocked down two threes. Stephanie White benched her. She benched her, and guess what? The Washington Mystics were off to the races. Off to the races. By the way, we'd love to see some pick and roll.
On one end of the court, Caitlin Clark was doing everything possible to keep Indiana alive, delivering the kind of exhausting superstar performance that only elite guards can handle. She was scoring from deep, breaking down defenses, creating impossible shots late in possessions, and carrying the pressure of every crucial moment on her shoulders. But while Clark kept producing highlight after highlight, the rest of the game told a completely different story. The scoreboard became a brutal reminder that talent alone cannot save a team when the structure around it keeps falling apart. No matter how hard she pushed, the system around her looked like it was slowly collapsing under the pressure. The 104-102 double overtime loss to Washington was not just another mark in the loss column. It felt like the moment the pressure surrounding Indiana officially became impossible to ignore. Games like that do not fade away after the final buzzer. They stay in people's minds. They replay across social media. And they force difficult questions that organizations usually try to avoid. What made the situation even worse was how familiar the collapse looked. This was not some random bad shooting night or one unlucky mistake at the end of the game. It was the same pattern fans have watched over and over again. Defensive breakdowns, lost momentum, poor late-game control, and a team struggling to hold its identity together under pressure. By the end of the night, the frustration had spread far beyond the court because everyone watching could already feel what was coming next. Indiana kept finding ways to fight back into games, only to lose them through the exact same structural problems that never seem to disappear no matter who is playing. That is when the attention completely shifted away from the game itself and toward what happened afterward in the post-game press conference. The moment where coaches are expected to answer difficult questions, explain key decisions, and take ownership after a loss filled with obvious problems. But instead of clarity, the entire situation slowly turned uncomfortable. When Stephanie White sat down in front of the media, the questions started off normally, focused on defensive mistakes, rotations, and lineup choices that fans had already been criticizing for weeks. Yet the more reporters pushed, the more tense the room became. Every question kept leading back to the same issue. Why were the exact same problems happening over and over again with no visible adjustments? White responded with the usual phrases about communication, effort, and discipline, but the deeper the conversation went, the more it felt like the real answers were being carefully avoided. And that was the part people noticed immediately. The tension was no longer about basketball strategy alone. It became about accountability. There was no real explanation for the lineup decisions during critical possessions, no detailed response about the repeated defensive mismatches, and no direct acknowledgement of the moments that completely shifted the game toward Washington. By the end of the press conference, the silence surrounding those missing answers felt louder than anything that had actually been said. Instead, the entire press conference kept drifting back toward vague explanations, almost like the specific problems everyone was asking about were being treated as separate from the actual loss itself, even though those exact mistakes had decided the game. That was when the mood in the room completely changed. Reporters started pressing harder about rotations, late-game adjustments, and why the same breakdowns continued happening every single night. Suddenly, what began as a normal media session turned tense fast. You could feel the frustration building with every answer. And then came the moment that sent social media into overdrive. Before the conversation could naturally wrap up, Stephanie White abruptly stepped away from the podium, ending the session in a way that immediately fueled even more speculation online. What should have been a routine post-game interview suddenly became one of the biggest talking points surrounding the team. And honestly, the reason this moment exploded so quickly is because it connected to a much bigger issue everyone has already been noticing for weeks. Indiana still looks like a team searching for a real identity. Offensively, they can survive because Caitlin Clark is capable of dragging the team into competitive games almost by herself when she catches rhythm. But defensively, the same cracks keep reopening. Opponents are finding easy runs, paint defense continues collapsing at the worst moments, and every close game starts feeling predictable once the pressure rises late. The most concerning part is that frustration no longer seems limited to fans or media discussions. You can now see it leaking onto the court itself through body language, reactions, and visible exhaustion from players carrying massive offensive responsibilities while also trying to cover defensive problems that cannot be fixed through effort alone. Caitlin Clark's post-game comments quietly revealed the real issue without turning the situation into unnecessary drama. Instead of blaming teammates or calling anyone out directly, she focused on one simple point. When the shots stop falling, the defensive intensity cannot disappear with them. And that statement carried far more weight than people realized. Because this is no longer just about missed shots or bad possessions. It is about consistency, accountability, and whether the team can maintain the same energy when the offense is no longer saving them. That is often where struggling teams begin to split emotionally, when scoring becomes the thing that controls effort instead of defensive discipline setting the tone no matter what is happening offensively. What makes the situation even more frustrating for fans is that there still has not been a visible adjustment that changes how these lineups function under pressure. The messaging from the coaching staff continues to revolve around broad ideas and generic explanations, which is common in professional sports, but becomes impossible to ignore when the exact same problems keep showing up against completely different opponents. That is why the reaction to Stephanie White's press conference exploded so quickly online. It was not just about one awkward media moment. It connected directly to a growing belief among fans that the issues hurting Indiana are not actually being fixed in a meaningful way. And once that feeling settles into a fan base, every loss starts carrying more weight than the one before it. Not only because of the scoreboard, but because it begins to feel like the same collapse is happening over and over again with only minor changes to the ending. The truth is, Indiana's season is still far from over. Nothing has been decided in the standings yet. But emotionally, seasons are often judged long before the numbers make it official, especially when a team enters the year surrounded by massive expectations and non-stop national attention. And that is exactly where the pressure around Indiana has become different from most teams in the league. Every game now feels bigger than the final score itself. It is no longer just about winning or losing. It is about whether this team actually looks stable, organized, and capable of growing under pressure. Right now, that sense of stability is starting to disappear, and uncertainty is taking its place. For a franchise built around one of the most watched young stars in basketball, every problem becomes amplified. Every possession is dissected online, every rotation sparks debate, and every post-game explanation gets compared directly to what fans just watched happen on the court. That is why the pressure surrounding this team keeps growing after every close loss. People are no longer waiting for promises or broad explanations. They are waiting to see visible changes. The upcoming stretch of games will not just test Indiana's talent level. It will test whether the adjustments this coaching staff keeps talking about can finally create a defensive identity strong enough to survive in pressure moments. Because offensively, this team has already shown it can score with almost anyone when Caitlin Clark catches rhythm. But defense is what separates entertaining losses from meaningful wins, and until that changes, every close game risks turning into another frustrating night filled with the exact same questions and the exact same answers. Meanwhile, the entire league is paying attention. Fans are reacting to every possession in real time, social media is magnifying every mistake, and the pressure surrounding Indiana keeps building with every game. The season is still unfolding, but somehow it already feels heavier than anyone expected, and that weight is only growing stronger with each passing night. So the question is no longer limited to a single press conference or one emotional post-game moment. It has become something much larger. Whether Indiana can actually stabilize the most fragile part of its game before frustration hardens into a narrative, and that narrative eventually defines the identity of the season. Because once that point is reached, reversing it becomes one of the hardest challenges in basketball. At that stage, the real battle is no longer just happening on the court, but inside the structure of how the team is being guided through adversity. There are moments when everything briefly looks aligned. The ball moves with pace, shots fall in rhythm, and defensive stops finally create transition chances that should shift momentum. But those moments are almost immediately followed by breakdowns that erase any progress before it can become sustainable. That cycle has started to repeat itself often enough that it is no longer easy to dismiss. And when inconsistency becomes a pattern instead of an exception, attention naturally shifts toward coaching decisions and structural choices. Not because coaches are solely responsible for every mistake, but because structure is supposed to be the thing that prevents small fluctuations from turning into full-game collapses. Without that stabilizing layer, even strong offensive stretches begin to feel temporary, and every close game becomes another test of whether the system can hold when pressure rises.